I'm going to talk a little bit about skin color. This image here shows a variety of skin colors that exist in humans. This is a really cool work here. You can see this article, a artist who is kind of categorizing humans by the shade of their skin. So this example here is a subset of the shades that humans can be. It's pretty amazing diversity. So I want to talk about the also really cool biology behind that. So if you remember from an image I showed in an earlier slide, we're going to be focusing on the epidermis, and that's because there are these special cells, in addition to the keratinocytes, which are a type of epithelial cell, there's also something called melanocytes. These are shown over here, melanocytes here. They are a specialized type of epithelial cell that produced melanin. And melanin is a pigment that has a color to it. You can see that right here, that brown pigment that is here. So hopefully this part's review. I want to go into a little bit more detail on how these melanocytes work and how they provide protection from UV light. So here is another view of skin. This is thin skin, doesn't matter for this because we're focused on that stratum basale that's just above the basement membrane. And in this layer, you remember there's mitotic cells that are dividing and contributing to the epidermis. There's also melanocytes, and these melanocytes are producing melanin. We zoom in down to this view here. This is a view of one melanocyte and the other epithelial cells that surround it. And these melanocytes are producing melanosomes. Melanosomes are vesicles that are then released from these melanocytes via exocytosis. And these melanosomes contain a pigment called melanin. Now, all humans actually contain the same number of melanocytes, but they're producing different amounts of melanin in these vesicles. So someone who has more brown skin is producing more of these. These vesicles then travel to the neighboring keratinocytes, and the melanin is actually then, these are called melanized keratinocytes. The melanin is literally a sun hat. It's sitting on top of these cells, and what are they doing? They're protecting the nucleus. Why? Because the nucleus contains DNA, and DNA can be subject to DNA damage. So here's a little image showing that. UV light can damage DNA, it can break it. We actually have mechanisms to repair this, but those repair mechanisms aren't perfect, and DNA damage can lead to cancer. Skin cancer, as you know, can occur from exposure to sunlight. So this melanin literally provides little sun hats for the nuclei that are in these layers down here. And they also then can make skin look various pigments. So all humans, except for people with albinism, who are completely white, are contain some amount of melanin. We're all tinted with some amount of melanin. Some of there's actually different types of melanin as well. Some are more reddish and some are more purplish, and some of it's more brown to black. And individuals can vary with the amount of melanin produced. These same pigments also determine hair color as well, which is kind of cool. Kind of a nice summary of two different individuals that kind of represent browner skin. Again, more melanin produced, potentially more melanosomes, and more melanin in each melanosome, and lighter skin. So this individual would have less melanin. Again, there's that piece about some of this can be dynamic based on sunlight exposure, but the baseline is determined by genetics. So the genetics of what type of melanin and how much is produced. Individuals who have lighter skin, often you can see other pigments in there better. So hemoglobin is another pigment that it can determine skin color, both in just at rest as well as with exercise. So people of all skin colors can turn a little pink when they exercise. That can be especially prominent in people with lighter skin. Keratin is another pigment that's orangish that can can influence skin color as well. So melanin is not the only one, but it's definitely the one that is the most prominent, and also the one that's the most kind of adaptive in terms of its function in sun protection and UV protection. So the last piece here is showing this idea of UV light actually increasing melanin production. This is something that can happen above the baseline. And still, one thing I want to say is UV light is still damaging regardless of the fact that it can increase melanin production. So UV light, when it strikes the cells, it can actually cause keratinocytes to be stimulated and cause melanocytes to start producing more melanin. There's receptors that detect UV light, and melanocytes are producing more melanin now and is contributing to that shielding effect, that sun hat effect. However, even this exposure, right, this UV light could damage DNA itself before it gets to the response. So although this is an adaptive response to future sunlight, that UV light that's initially there can also damage skin, especially in someone who produces less melanin in the first place. So sunscreen's useful still. So again, a tan doesn't necessarily cause cancer, but it's a sign of UV exposure that could still cause cancer. What's cool is there's if you want to read this article here, researchers are currently studying ways to increase melanin production without UV exposure because that could be damaging. So you can stimulate, this is done in animal models at this point, you can stimulate the receptors that detect UV light without the actual UV light in order to initiate this pathway without the actual UV damage. That's something that's being looked into in terms of preventing skin cancer, especially in light-skinned individuals. So I think this is a pretty cool example of how, not example, but this understanding of how skin color exists. And it's really just a genetic difference in how much melanin we're producing. So this learning outcome was explain what accounts for individual differences in skin color and how melanin relates to UV protection. And some of the few terms I used for this one, you also need to refer to your other terms from before, epidermis, keratinocytes, that you might refer to as well when addressing this learning outcome.